Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 7th of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway, and I almost know what day it is. Ransomware gang targets IT workers with new rat masquerading as an IP scanner. So there is a ransomware as a service outfit known as Hunters International, and they are pushing a rat known as Sharp Rhino Rat via ads for fake ads for a legitimate tool called Angry IP Scanner. It is believed that this is being delivered via typo squatting and adverts, although it's uncertain whether malvertising is actually the means of getting admins to download the wrong stuff, but it's most likely the way that it is being distributed. Definitely typo squatting is considered to be, it is part of this. So there's a nice write-up in HelpNet Security that shows exactly what goes on, but basically you download the malware as ipscan 3.9.1-setup.exe, and when you run it, the installer creates a shortcut to Microsoft.Anykey.exe, which then executes logupdate.bat file. That is a PowerShell script that compiles C code and loads the compiled binary into memory. Basically ready. At that point, it's ready. And the malware also establishes itself in two identical directories. Two directories with identical files. So that if you find one and believe you have deleted it, there's another copy kicking around somewhere, although it doesn't say in this article exactly where the two are likely to be located. This particular group has claimed responsibility for around 130 attacks so far in 2024. Ransomware operators exfiltrate data, leave your stuff encrypted. So blah blah blah. So what's the takeaway from this one? Well, again, be very careful about where you are downloading software from. If you are, this is specifically aimed at the types of people who are liable to have elevated privileges within their organization. So, general users are not normally downloading IP scanners, so they can be fairly certain that if this particular piece of malware has been downloaded, it's been downloaded and installed by somebody who's got access to or already has privileged account or elevated rights account within that organization. So I think the reason it's jumped out at me is because if we're working in technology, be it the IT side, infrastructure side, whatever it might be, or the cyber side directly, we are targets for increasingly we are the targets for these sorts of attacks. The groups which we see being targeted most often, by the way, are senior execs and that's aimed mainly at account takeover. So logic behind it being if the CFO sends the junior, the accounts payable junior a strongly worded email saying this particular invoice is late, why hasn't this been paid? If you want to keep your job, pay this immediately. And we see quite a loss of that sort of thing. So targeting people who are senior enough in the organisation to be able to get other people in the organisation to do things they shouldn't. Takes quite a brave junior to say to an angry CFO, I'm not going to do what you've asked until you verify who you are. I've met one or two that have done that, but the vast majority of people will look at it and go, they won't even ask. But even if they, it just doesn't occur to them that they should challenge it. So yeah, that's one side. The other targeted group, or groups being targeted en masse, tend to be people who may have administrative rights or elevated privileges within the organisation if the object of the exercise is to gain access to stuff that is being run by that organisation. So the ransomware kind of things. Very common. You want to be able to spread this stuff rapidly around the environment. You also want to be able to do things like turn off endpoint protection, blah, 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 blah. So targeting the IT team is a good way to do that. And that doesn't necessarily mean targeting the most senior people in IT. It actually, even people who are earlier in their careers or more junior in the organisation may well have the ability to install software on devices across the board, or may have access to local administrator or global or domain administrator accounts, that kind of thing. If we work in technology or cyber or any combination of that, definitely be aware that this sort of stuff is going on, which is why I brought this to your attention. But it's also a good write-up, so it is worth having a little read, because understanding how this sort of attack is undertaken is very useful. Okay, so there have been 35,000 DNS hijack attempts in the last few months. So the method, this isn't new. I mean, the hijacking DNS. I think we spoke briefly about it. It might even have been yesterday. It might have been a week or two ago. But hijacking DNS is a very good way for malicious organizations to direct unsuspecting users to websites controlled by the malicious group, the threat actor. So there are various ways that can be done. Typo squatting, which I always find difficult to say, is the typical one that you see in malvertising, Google ads and that sort of stuff. But actually taking over somebody's DNS, controlling it directly, is increasingly common. This particular attack is known as sitting ducks attack, mainly because it is relatively straightforward for those who know what they're doing to execute, but it does then effectively hand over control of your DNS names to the attackers. So the attackers are leveraging poor domain verification practices by DNS providers. So the attacks are exploiting misconfigurations at the registrar level and insufficient ownership verifications. Attackers are leveraging these vulnerabilities to take control of domains through lame delegations, making the hijack process more effective and harder to detect. So just as a reminder about what lame delegations are, so effectively, a lame delegation occurs when the name servers responsible for providing an authoritative answer for a domain fail to respond to DNS queries or respond in an improper way in some way. Lame delegation might be a result of unavailability, misconfiguration, lack of connectivity, inconsistency. They may be simply non-existent, or they may lack updates. So generally, by the way, you see this sort of stuff as longer lookup times, resolution failures, degraded user experience. poor organic search performance and damage to online reputation. But you also see this as security threats. So the article at Akamai that explains what lame delegation actually is talks about attackers may exploit unresponsive or misconfigured name servers to launch an array of DNS attacks, such as DNS hijacking, cache poisoning, or amplification attacks. So be aware that DNS always has been a somewhat weak area from a security perspective, because the entire concept of how a DNS works dates back to a time where having servers that could talk to each other was a really cool thing. Nobody actually thought about the fact that you might want to compromise. Why would you break something that you've just spent so much time trying to make work? And it hasn't got much beyond that. There are protections around DNS. However, it is definitely a case of watch out for domain takeovers. If your DNS provider can apply some security around that, I think that is a very good thing. You definitely want to be aware of how they verify you if they're being asked to make changes. So ownership verification is important, or potentially run your own DNS. Used to be very popular. Currently, it's not very popular because it's seen as just being one of those things that we don't need to do because we can just get somebody else to do it for us. Well, yeah, that's okay, as long as they're doing it all right and you know what questions to ask. So be aware of that. Particularly, this is being exploited by various groups, mainly aimed, I think, around phishing and brand impersonation, as well as data threat. Certain Russian threat actors are particularly active at the moment, including Spammy Bear. And I think Vacant Viper is another group that have been associated with this, but there are various groups out there. If you want to find out who's doing what, by the way, use the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the MITRE ATT&CK information. You can find out who's doing what, or who's known to do what from that. So, little plug for a good group of people there. Other things: North Korean hackers exploit VPN update flaw to breach networks. Well, okay, this is aimed mostly at South Korea. However, the techniques involved in this are definitely worth being aware of. It's a targeted attack at the moment, which is a complex supply chain attack against South Korean construction industry. But the article is interesting, makes an interesting read. If you are concerned around how these sorts of things are being exploited, this is a good article, gbhackers.com, that takes you through a couple of cases that are around how this particular vulnerability is being exploited. Again, it is down to understanding what it is that you've got in your environment and how it's being managed in order to avoid getting caught with these sorts of supply chain attacks. The mitigations, I think, are good ones. So rather than worrying directly too much about this attack, the mitigations, I think, are worth bringing to people's attention. So provide continuous security education. Yeah, we know about that. Customized training for general staff and IT staff specifically. Keep stuff properly up to date. Implement approval policies for software deployment. Require administrator authentication as part of deployment. And then keep on top of supply chain security guidelines, which almost definitely, regardless of country, the nation, like the nation state protectors, NCSC in the UK, will do have good recommendations around how to avoid being caught out by these sorts of things. So this is more just a little nudge to be aware that this stuff goes on, not happening in the UK specifically at the moment, but if there's a technique, you can expect to see it being used all over the place. And then finally from me today, there's an article in InfoSecurity magazine that talks about the numbers of CVEs being registered. So far in 2024, there's been a 30% surge in registered CVEs, as in there are more vulnerabilities being discovered and registered. I mean, that isn't necessarily... I don't think you can draw a direct correlation between the numbers of CVEs being registered and the number of new vulnerabilities that exist, because there is very much... the correlation is based on how hard people are looking for things, and with like an intersection with how many things there are out there to find. So it could well be that part of this is down to defenders being better at identifying vulnerabilities. It could also be that software vendors are doing a bad job and not reading their OWASP top 10 and acting on it. So anyway, what is interesting though is that just under 1% of reported CVEs are being weaponized. So far, 22,200, according to this article, 22,254 vulnerabilities have been registered and have CVE numbers. 204 of those vulnerabilities have been weaponized, to the best of people's knowledge. That's interesting for various reasons. One of the things they're saying here is, "Oh, that's an awful lot." Well, I think, yeah, okay, it's too many, and that's absolutely fine. However, we are guilty in the InfoSec and cybersecurity industry is absolutely guilty of overplaying how complicated security is. They have a vested interest in telling customer organizations that it's all too complicated, you can't do it yourself. You're going to make a mess of this, you're going to cost you a fortune to do it yourself, and you're not even going to be able to do it, blah, blah, blah. It's all too hard, it's all too scary. You just don't know what you're doing in this space. One of the things that we talk about regularly, all the time, whenever anybody's listening, and even when they're not listening, we're shouting it out into the void, is not cybersecurity is nothing like as hard as people make it sound. With the caveat that 80% of the stuff that organizations actually get compromised by would be covered by doing some pretty basic cyber hygiene. The other 20% or so is, let's be honest, that is probably pretty complicated stuff, but you minimize the likelihood of being hit by that stuff anyway by being good at the basics regardless. So, and equally, you're never going to get hit by the complex stuff if you can be compromised by the basic stuff. One of the stats, which is probably a little out of date now, but the concept is about right, is if you're looking at the MITRE attack framework, the matrix itself, with all of the different TTPs in all of the different stages of an attack. It's a fantastic matrix. In theory, there are thousands, probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands, of paths through the matrix from that initial interest right the way through to the execution on objectives, as they would in kill chain language. However, at any one time, only around 100 TTPs tend to get actively used. Okay, and that just comes from empirical evidence, not from that's literally just people who are measuring the stuff at scale, looking at what's going on. Okay, and this is broadly in line with that. If we're saying that this year, out of 22,000 identified vulnerabilities, only 200 or so are have been weaponized. That's kind of in line. Certainly, in my mind, that is in line enough for us to know that we're on the right path from a defender perspective. So, what should you do with this stuff? Well, I think the answer is understand what these things are. Understand your attackers, understand what is going on. You'll see that there's a great deal of stuff that's being reused across particular groups. So certain defenses are going to be much more useful against real-world attacks than other defenses against other things. If you are aware, so obviously if a vulnerability has got a CVE, and if there is a patch available, just patch the blooming thing. Or if there are mitigating actions you can take, reconfigurations, whatever it may be, just do them. Don't faff about with it. It's much easier than you think. Just get on with it. JFDI. I'm going to get so much stick. I'm going to get so much stick over this, but never mind. The other thing then is, well, if you know that 200 things have been weaponized, understand what those things are and make sure that it's very specifically, regardless of your vulnerability management piece, which is aiming to deal with 22,000 things, make sure that your security visibility tooling and that your technical security defense tooling is able to deal with that 200 things. So think about it like that. You're only trying to protect against 200 vulnerabilities that have been weaponized. That's manageable. You're trying to patch 22,000 things. That's also manageable, but you don't need to be putting in the same level of detection and protection against all 22,000 if only 200 of them are actively being used, in which case you do need to keep on top of those 200. See where I'm going with that? Anyway, I think that is probably enough from me for today. Overrun slightly, you can tell. Lots to talk about now I'm back. Hope you have a really good Wednesday, and I will speak to you all again